The Zone Coverage Podcast Network.
Wolves Wired Podcast, Zone Coverage Podcast Network, here with David Naylor, Dane Moore, Tom Schreier, as always. I'm Tim Fakeless, and since the last time we potted, the Timberwolves have played, what, one game, two games?
Two games.
Two games.
Doesn't feel that long ago. Oh, they played on Friday and Saturday. So.
And we potted on Thursday, so.
Oh, that's right.
Just filling the schedule.
And
they went probably, I think, about as we expected them to go the last time we talked.
Yeah, I mean, they won the game that they were supposed to win, albeit it was closer than I think some people would have expected. And then they lost to the Philadelphia 76ers, and it was more of a blowout than the final score might have let on. The Wolves trailed by as many as 29 in that game. But for some reason, the bench, and I'm not talking about Jamal Crawford.
The deep bench.
I'm talking about Tyus Jones, Aaron Brooks, Marcus Georges-Hunt, Gorky Jang, and Cole Aldrich,
yes,
a.k.a. Murderers Row, came in and won the fourth quarter by 17, got the lead down to 9.
Made Philly put their starters back in, which was hilarious.
It was hilarious. But, I mean, let's be real. The Wolves got smoked in that game.
Yeah, that was not close.
But they did beat the Knicks, and they got their wins, so they're 42. They got 42 wins in the with 8 games to go. And, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. The Wolves do not have to travel further east than Memphis again this season, which, based on how the season has gone, I would say is nothing but good news for the team.
Yeah, Memphis is underratedly east. Okay, so the good news coming into this week is, granted, a week from today, Sunday, they do play the Utah Jazz at home. Their next 3 games, Memphis, Atlanta, and Dallas.
2 of the 3 at home, too.
In theory, the Wolves should win those 3 games by a combined 6,000, give or take.
They should do what the Sixers
did to the
them.
Wolves.
Yes.
They should do what the Hornets did to the Grizzlies, in my humble opinion.
So, really quickly, let's talk about the Sixers game because it's on my mind, and I was talking to a friend about it before we started potting. Joel Embiid and Karl-Anthony Towns. I mean, they're both, I think they're pretty much, it's across the board that they're kind of the 2 rising stars at the center position in the NBA. But when they face head-to-head, or rather when they have this year, Embiid has gotten the better of Towns both times. And in this most recent matchup, Towns really looked like he wanted to make a statement on Embiid to the point where it was affecting his shot selection a little bit. And I don't know. I just kind of want to go around the room and talk about, I mean, what do you see when those 2 match up?
Didn't Towns' defense improve drastically when Embiid ripped him on Instagram? Like, wasn't there a direct correlation between the 2?
It does line up.
He takes this really seriously in a very I feel like very obvious
and
manner.
that win streak where they started destroying good teams when they beat Cleveland by a million and they beat OKC
immediately after they
again.
lost to Philly.
Yeah, it was right after they had lost to Philly, and Towns' defense did get better. And I mean, it's fluctuated a little bit recently, but
I think Towns specifically,
yeah.
he had an awful weekend. I thought, particularly on the defensive end, it showed up in New York in that first game. I was like, oh wow, these are some pretty big steps back, and kind of that same over pursuit that he was doing that leads to simple drop offs. And then the Sixers, that's as bad as I've seen in months. And that's not even specifically in the Embiid type situations. He just, I think, to kind of extrapolate off of that, when Towns isn't performing well on the offensive end, or he has this anxiety around needing to perform well because he's playing Joel Embiid, that shows up in his defensive game in an adverse type of way. I mean, generally it's the over pursuit, but even he'll just get hyper focused on a thing. And for any defender, particularly a center that's a tentpole of the defense, it just requires seeing everything. And there was one play just really stuck out to me. Embiid was out. He's guarding Amir Johnson, who has probably made 3 threes in his career, and Johnson kind of catches it at the elbow, and above the elbow, almost on the 3-point line, and Towns is just like super into like locking down Amir Johnson at 20 feet, and Amir Johnson literally just drops it off to Marco Bellinelli, who's rolling to the basket for a wide open left-handed layup. It's in that situation, there's no reason. It's this thought process by Towns where he just wants to, I got to get the ball back right now. Amir has it. I'm going to go take it. And it's really childish. I mean, they're childish in the way that that's what children do when they play basketball. And he needs to have some sort of, and granted, he is young, but he does need to have some sort of internal voice in his head to say, it doesn't matter what happened on the last possession. I need to revert to the principles of the defense, because if I don't, this defense doesn't work because I'm the center.
At the beginning of the season, Towns was criticized for, his defense and all this other stuff about his defense was coming out, especially around media day. And I play by my instincts was a big thing for Towns. And then, like you said, with when they played Philadelphia, he played really scatterbrained and tried to do everything at 150%. So, that's kind of why, for me, it goes back to the whole Embiid thing. I think he was very aware that he was being measured up against another young all-star quality center, and Embiid doesn't really have that. He's very aware of what's going on, but it doesn't seem to affect him to the same degree. So Embiid
more
played
confidence.
Yeah, and more calm than anything else, and I think that's to Embiid's advantage until Towns figures out how to level that.
And there's also the fact that Joel Embiid is a really freaking good basketball player.
He's amazing.
He is so good. And playing against someone who's not maybe playing their best against him just exacerbates that. And that's been and Embiid wasn't the only person from Philadelphia that had a great game last night, but that was the most glaring thing since that's the marquee matchup.
So early in the season, the narrative of Towns was he makes a great offensive play, he locks in on defense, and then vice versa, right? If he's not involved in the offense, he kind of just checks out defensively. Have you guys seen this throughout the season? Because I don't remember that narrative coming up as kind of frequently as it did early in the season, but it seems pretty obvious now after this game.
That
if he doesn't play well offensively or if he's not involved offensively, his defense suffers.
I think that's been a thing the whole year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I remember
I'd
at
say
one
that
point
too.
Jerry Zagota asked Tibbs about something like that, where if he's not getting post touches, he's not going to something or other on defense, and Tibbs snapped on it, if I recall.
Right. I think the best, when we've seen the best of Karl-Anthony Towns, it's because he has started with some very strong defensive play, and then that seems to have inspired offensive play. Like, if you can kind of invert that, that's kind of how you get the best Towns. But in this game, they went to Towns super early. I think he shot 4 threes in the first 2 minutes. He made 2 of them, but it was just they fell behind to the Sixers, and he and the rest of the team just felt like they were scrambling back, and it really kind of put in perspective for me what this team is without Jimmy Butler.
Yeah, that was a very much of any of their games over the past few weeks, that one felt like a they need Jimmy Butler game more than anyone.
Philadelphia has basically the same record as they do. I think they were both 10 games over 500 or 11 games over 500 going into the game. Mm-hmm. They're roughly in equivalent positions in their conferences. Yeah. And the first game they played with Jimmy Butler was a very close game that Philadelphia won. Yeah. This was not close.
I don't think it would have been. I think they would have rolled the Wolves if Jimmy Butler played too.
Well, and it's we haven't talked about the one mitigating factor, which is A, it was a road back-to-back, and B, apparently the Wolves had plane trouble again out east, which caused them to not get to Philadelphia until 6 in the morning.
I guess that's what I meant by why they would still get rolled too. I think they're comparable teams.
Yeah,
they are.
But you put in that factor of getting them really late. It's a back-to-back. Philadelphia's been playing excellent lately.
Yes.
Probably better than what the Wolves were in those last couple Jimmy Butler games. So they're kind of hitting their stride, and the Wolves are kind of in this in between. But I guess again to loop back to that, it was just insightful to me that you look at a team led by Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons, and they're just clearly superior than an Andrew Wiggins, Karl Towns team. I think even if we even the play neutral site, even rest, whatever. That's just a better group, and we're talking about the Wolves with their 2 first overall picks and the first and third pick with Simmons and Embiid.
Even if you compare, let's say you sort of put Towns and Embiid on a similar playing level, and I don't think it's fair to, but let's just, for the sake of doing it, put Wiggins and Simmons in that same playing field.
Not even close.
Even with Jimmy Butler in the lineup, the Sixers are vastly superior defensively this year. I think are they top 5 defensively through the year? If not, they are through this stretch that they're on. They've been an outstanding defensive team, and Covington's a huge part of that, and just sort of this big lineup they play, but they're all agile. They're a fun team to watch. But
they are 4th in the NBA in defensive rating on the season.
I'm very impressed with the way that they shut down the Wolves. They made Jeff Teague useless offensively, and man, when I said that this game needed Jimmy Butler earlier, that wasn't to suggest necessarily that they would have won with him, but rather to suggest that a calming presence was more needed in that game than any loss I've seen without him this year, or so far this year.
Kind of somebody to break that ice of like, oh, that was a bad possession,
or a bad defensive breakdown, breakdown where, I mean, Taj Gibson has some say in what happens, and he's totally willing to hold a Towns accountable, but I mean, you've been in the locker room, he has this presence in there, and the presence, I think, was missing in that game.
Why do you think it is that Karl-Anthony Towns can't? I mean, he has to watch film, and he has to be seeing what Rudy Gobert does and Joel Embiid, and remove the super technical elements of defense and just simply emulating the style and way that a Joel Embiid or Rudy Gobert play. Why? What I don't understand is why is there so much disconnect? Because you just kind of see Gobert and Embiid kind of seamlessly drop into you don't need to know a lot about basketball to be like, wow, that guy just seems to calmly just shut down any team's ability to get to the rim, and Towns just can't seem to play the same style even as Joel Embiid. And obviously Embiid and Gobert are the gold standard of center, but it just Towns' frenetic ways of his idea seems of playing defense is to get a steal. Whereas Embiid and Gobert seem to understand that if I'm just making the shots harder for my opponent, then that is going to, in the aggregate, improve our defense.
Well, that, the description that you put forward makes it sound like, I guess it doesn't feel like Towns views himself as a rim protector on defense in that aspect. He views himself more as a disruptor and someone who can move out to the perimeter and deal with stuff on the perimeter, which he can do.
Not in this system, though.
Not in this system, though. That's the problem. Is if he's functioning as the rim protector in this system, he has to be the rim protector and think like a rim protector and play like a rim protector, which, as you're saying, he's not doing. He's thinking like a 4 on defense, essentially, right?
Think about. I think a really good example of something that a lot of people have seen is how Tristan Thompson played in the NBA Finals against the Warriors when Cleveland won it, and you saw Tristan Thompson jumping out to hedge a pick and roll there, and he was quick enough and agile enough to kind of move with that there, and you're like, wow, a big man who can switch and attack a pick and roll defensively is of such value, and we only see Towns do that by when things go awry here in Minnesota, and you just wonder. What I wonder is that if he plopped Towns onto other middling team X through his first 3 years in the year, and he's 3 years in the league, and he was never with Tom Thibodeau, you wonder if he would have gotten more opportunities to play, again, that general style of Tristan Thompson, kind of like a 4, as you suggested. Would we be having the same conversation man, Towns has no idea how to play defense? You think with that, by playing not the dropping style of big, that you'd be like, he's okay. He's not the best, but you would see him do more good things. Be like, oh wow, he got a steal there. Oh wow, he looks so fast. If you think about that play last year where he closed out on Bradley Beal at the end of the game, or there's the Steph Curry clip like that. Towns can do some of those things. He's just not allowed to do them. I remember Tibbs talking about it a game one time and said that's not what's supposed to happen, and Towns confirmed it. He's like, yeah, that's not not what's supposed to happen. I'm only switching when we kind of fall apart.
And the weird thing for Towns, for me, and maybe it's not a fair comparison because offensive IQ and defensive IQ are two totally different things, but even on an off night for Towns, he still ends up shooting like 6 of 11 for 17 points or something like that on the offensive end.
Yeah.
His offensive efficiency and IQ are so high that, I mean, if nothing else, it proves his work ethic and the fact that he's putting in the effort on the offensive end. And, I mean, like we were just talking about with the Embiid thing, I think he's hyper aware of what people are saying about him.
Sure.
So I think he's probably putting in the effort on the defensive end too, which is resulting in this hyper overthinking, use my instincts, but also just kind of blindly go into things with full-on effort. I just don't think he's necessarily approaching it the right way, which on one hand is bad in the short term, but in the long term, could that be a good thing? Because I think when we talk about Embiid and Gobert, those are two very calm and collected just people, personalities. I mean, I know Embiid's like a personality on Twitter or anything, but if you ever watched him in a basketball game, he doesn't say much very often unless he's on the bench and they're winning by 1,000 and they're sideline reporters talking. That's another story. But there aren't too many like great defensive bigs historically that I can think of that are known for being these hyper crazy. Kevin Garnett's a huge exception, of course, but I'm thinking of like Tim Duncan and Akeem Olajuwon and all these other guys. I don't know if there's a trend there, but it seems like there's a calming factor for interior rim protectors.
Interior rim protection is zen.
Yeah. Is that an Akeem quote?
Apparently. It is now.
Speaking to their mentalities, Rudy Gobert is the 27th overall pick, right? Did he come into the league defense focused, feeling like that was kind of his recipe for success?
Well, I think, and one thing that I feel kind of bad about pinning Towns up against those two guys because they are much bigger and much more physically imposing defenders.
Well,
too,
they're the cream of the crop. This is like trying to figure out why Gobert hasn't become like an offensive savant and comparing him to Karl-Anthony Towns.
I guess that's the direction I was going in. Is it seemed like that was his ticket to the league, right?
He knew,
he
knew that. Yeah, that's how I'm going to do it.
And Embiid just is built for it, right?
Yeah,
and so I still think it's a fair question though. Is how much of it is his mentality versus how much is it the system he's put into or what he's asked to do? Because it seems like you're saying like he probably could be asked to do more or asked to play a different role.
He could be asked to do different. I don't know if it would be more. It's
or better necessarily, right?
Yeah, and it's really hard because it's just like, but the Wolves is so like specific, and I just don't think that like fits Towns' brand and his brain that you were talking about, Tim. And what I often think about when with Towns' questionable defense and that frenetic style that we're talking about is that's how he plays offense. Is this wild, flippant, going to the basket in a weird way. He said it numerous times at media things. I have a funky style of game. I have a funky game, and it is. You watch him, and it's wild, and it's very rarely like calm on offense. I guess I think about his jumper, and I think about his hook shot is like cool and collected on offense, but really any sort of drive, any sort of going for an offensive rebound is this wild man type of thing, and so I think it just burns into his head that I find success in that freneticism, and then he tries to apply that that same thought to defense, and I don't know, I get that to some extent. He's a 22-year-old, but it's just it's really wild to me that from a coaching angle that you can't say, okay, Karl, this is what. Focus on this. Show me this specific thing this game. Show me that you're going to stay touched up on your man for on every penetration. If that's what we're doing, I want you to stay touched up on the opposing big while also contesting it. Show me that for one game, and I think that is like the coaching style that you would see improvements, and that he would hit one thing first and then he would hit the next thing. You remember earlier in the season when they had a long break of time and their transition defense was just getting waxed, and we asked Tibbs at practice and the players too, these last 2 days all we focused on is transition defense. You remember that? And and then it comes out in the next like 3 or 4 games the transition defense was a lot better, and then it was and then that led to that kind of extended 15-game streak of time. So it's like, Tibbs, you're applying these overarching coaching style of one thing at what is our issue? Let's do one thing at a time to improve. Why isn't that applied on an individual basis with Towns on defense? Or why isn't that applied with Andrew Wiggins on an individual basis? And I'm not there, and I'm speculating. I'm also living in the moment of what I thought was one of Towns' probably worst games and definitely worst defensive games this season. But it really, this long of a time with Tibbs playing this way speaks so much to me about what Tibbs is as a coach. If not in success, but in style, I wonder if you would see anything similar to this if it was any other coach in the NBA who's coaching Towns.
And I wonder if, you were talking about transition defense, and he treated it as a wide-ranging issue. I wonder if he treats just general defense in the same manner as a result. So when Towns and Wiggins are having individual troubles, or Jeff Teague or Jamal Crawford are having individual troubles, he's ignoring that and trying to fix it more in the big picture. Yeah. I don't know what that looks like necessarily.
No, and the funny thing is, we're describing Towns as this kind of frenetic, funky, overactive, maybe is fair to say. And then you look at Andrew Wiggins, it's the opposite, right? It's floating, it's disengaged, it's aloof, it's kind of, we call him sleepy Fortnite Wiggins, right? Like the truth of the matter is, any coach may have trouble with both personalities, because you would think they'd probably be stronger in coaching one than the other. Mm-hmm. However, you would think that sometimes the simplest methods are the best. And this just seems like a simple method. Like, just focus on this tonight, right? Yeah. And this should improve. And it's just,
And you know what, too? He could be spoon feeding that to Towns, and Towns is just
not listening. Yeah.
It's just entirely possible.
Or it's not, I don't know. Not intentionally. Like, it's not registering.
And to Tibbs' credit, after games, before games, whatever have you, media availability, he's talked a lot about Wiggins floating, and I think he's talked a lot about Towns' defense in the past because he's asked about it. He's aware that, he doesn't care about the media asking questions about it, but he has answered in the manner that suggests that he is well aware and is trying to fix individual problems for both Towns and Wiggins. Mm-hmm. How he's approaching that, we're never going to know.
Well, and I'm sure he has a strategy, and he understands defense, particularly at NBA level, way more than all of us combined. But what I'm just saying on a bigger scale is, okay, we've had Tibbs has been Karl-Anthony Towns' coach for over 150 games now, and a lot of the core issues that were there in the first 20 games, you saw this whole weekend. I thought the Knicks game was bad too from Towns. It didn't show up as much because you're playing against like Kyle O'Quinn, but it
and Enes Kanter.
Yeah, and it's just that's just what it comes down to with Towns is. To spin this positively is that there is so much room for him to improve, and he is. So
he's already an all-star,
and even beyond that, really, his impact on the game, because as many tweaks as we're talking about, you can make defensively. Towns can become more efficient on offense. I think they could use Towns even better. I don't love the quality of looks from Towns like that. That can and I think will get even better. Like as much of a goon as he is offensively, it is like I do think that is. There is still room for offensive improvement from Towns, and I
totally agree.
And it's already maybe like the best individual one-on-one player, one of in the entire NBA. So the thing is these things can come up. I just wonder, at what point do you say there hasn't been change?
I don't want to interpret what you're saying wrong, but it feels like we're kind of skirting around the is Tibbs the right coach for this team question.
Yeah.
And we should just ask it because it's come up I've seen discussions about it. I think discussions about that topic based specifically on last night were way overblown because as we've talked about, this was a game that we almost expected them to lose it. Yeah. Situation was presented against them, and Philadelphia might not be a very good matchup for them, especially without Jimmy. But the Timberwolves are, even in this season that has been their best season in franchise history without Kevin Garnett, We can say that now. They've won 42 games. It's more than any team in Timberwolves history has won without Kevin
Which
Garnett on
is
the
so
team.
ridiculous, but yes.
They're still 25th in the league in defense, in defensive rating. And while they've been a great offensive team for the entire year, it doesn't feel like they're maximizing the skill sets of their best players, including Towns. So, not that we're suggesting there should be a change in coach, but I think that all of us would agree that there might be a coach that we could see doing a better job with the pieces that this roster has than Tom Thibodeau has done to this point.
Yeah. So there's a couple parts of this to me, because you have to also remember that he's the president of basketball operations and picks his players. And I've said before that I wonder how this team would look if there was a guy from the outside that knew Tibbs' coaching style that picked his players for him. So not to bring in maybe a Jeff Teague or Jamal Crawford, for example, that might fit a Tibbs system better to make a coach that likes to surround his reputation around defense, essentially. More defensive guys. Derrick Rose signing would not take place, for example. But at the same time, I mean, I've talked about this off the pod, but I found it very troubling and frustrating that when Rose was really struggling, his minutes would just continue to increase all the while. If you remember back when Tyus Jones was playing really well, or when Bielitsa was playing really well in Butler's absence, the second that those guys would come back, they'd be plopped right back into their 12-minute per game slots, essentially. So, I mean, there's a lot of nuance, and I think there's a lot of good that you can take from Tom Thibodeau. I mean, if you just take a step back and look at the big picture, this team is on the track that I think most people would have wanted for this team. Maybe more expectation last year than 31 wins, but they're supposed to go to the playoffs. They kept up their playoff pace even with a torn knee ligament, meniscus, there's the word, for Jimmy Butler. And I think Tibbs deserves some credit for that. Obviously, Karl-Anthony Towns is a monumental talent. Andrew Wiggins is still a scorer. They still have a decent roster, but I think if you take a step back and remember that this team is still sort of on the right path, not necessarily the same style that I think people expected, especially defensively, I think Thibodeau does deserve some credit, maybe perhaps more than he's gotten, especially as of late. But, I mean, there's definitely plenty to criticize as well.
To answer, David, your question is I would say Tibbs is the right coach for the job. I mean, obviously, you got to kind of think about and consider some of those things. I think more so than it not being like Tibbs not being the right coach for these players. I think these players are really difficult in their youth, and their personalities of Andrew Wiggins and Karl Towns, I think, are extremely unique for superstars, and it's this adjustment. It's this adjustment period that they're going through, and I can't say I'm an excellent judge or anything of like who the best coaches are in the NBA. I think we often just kind of draw that or line that up with wins and losses or exceeding your expectations. But I certainly think Tom Thibodeau is an NBA caliber coach. So
his time in Chicago would verify that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's and when I was saying that there's like I see things that could be improved on offense and defense, I kind of do think they're going to come, and that can come through Thibodeau. It just might have come earlier with a different coach. That would have that maybe that.
Let me ask you guys a few questions, because I think these I'm going to try to hit on every kind of angle here. First of all, with Jeff Teague, he treated him like Derrick Rose, right? He came back from injury. Everyone was like, why is he getting all these minutes? He looked like he was taking away from the team, right? Whether it was not passing in the right situation, dribbling the hell out of the ball, taking dumb, weird shots. And then all of a sudden he kind of put it together, and now he looks like the guy I'm assuming Tibbs wanted when he signed him in the offseason. However, with Nemanja Bjelica, it seemed like Bjelica would give you a little bit, and then he'd kind of disappear or be stuck in that 10 to 12 minute
Which he
role.
has in his last couple games, just for whatever it's worth, as a starter.
Is this simply Tibbs is always going to play that who he thinks is the highest ceiling player, where he's saying there's a higher ceiling for Teague than there is for Tyus Jones, or Nemanja Bjelica is a guy off the bench and he's only in the starter's role because Jimmy Butler's out? Do you think it's as simple as that, or do you think that there's something more complicated in terms of his distribution of minutes, which in some ways leads to player development or unlocking the player?
The parallel I draw between those guys is, and the players that Tibbs signed are the guys that he inherited. Tyus Jones he inherited, Nemanja Bjelica he inherited, Jeff Teague that's his guy. His stamp is on that. He wants that. Obviously, Derrick Rose, that's the case too. We've seen Taj Gibson play more minutes than he ever has in his career this season. Jimmy Butler, the one that you point to that he did sign himself that there isn't that parallel is Gorgie Jang.
Wiggins too, right? I mean, in that he signed an extension, but he didn't. But he also inherited him.
Yeah, he inherited him. I don't think Wiggins has always kind of been 37 minutes a game. Like there's been
right. Oh, I thought you were just trying to compile. A list.
Yeah. I guess I kind of doing a bit of both. But I just to your point, Tom, is I think he has more of a willingness to extend the leash.
His own guys.
Yeah, with the guys that he brought in, and I guess I don't know exactly what the logic is behind that.
And to be fair, with Towns and Wiggins, he chose this team. In some ways, he kind of quote unquote brought him in because he could have gone somewhere else.
True. I guess I didn't really think about that.
I think there's two parts of it. I mean, even back in Chicago, he always had a set of guys in his rotation that played a lot. He's always had that reputation. So, I would have to look back, but when Luol Deng would get hurt, like when that started to happen and he started to get injured, and Ronnie Brewer or somebody would come in and start for a while. My assumption, and I could be wrong, but my assumption is when Luol Deng came back, the minutes sort of evened themselves out. So I don't think this is necessarily a new thing, but I think the big part of it, is the president of basketball operations side of Tibbs, in that he feels a certain connection to Taj Gibson, and Jimmy Butler's an all-star, but he feels less of that to the guys that were already here that he perhaps wouldn't have signed / drafted had he been here. Not that he doesn't like Belly. He wouldn't be playing Belly all these minutes now as a starter, but...
Right. So he likes Belly more than Sam. We know that, right? Sam Mitchell seemed to dismiss him on Bjelica, like, almost explicitly.
Yeah.
And Tibbs, even when Belly wasn't playing well, is like he's getting back in rhythm. I think he just likes that kind of, going to Mirotic, and he likes that kind of player, right?
Sure.
A Sam Mitchell complaint was that, these AAU teams are run by some guy who has a car wash, and what the hell does he know about basketball? And they overplay.
Smitch pressers.
But it wasn't even that. Like, it was at practice when it wasn't like a show, when it was just like you just talking to him. He's like, it's some dude with a car wash who has a team, and they're not learning fundamental basketball, and they play too much and all this. What do you think Tibbs' acumen, going back to kind of the conversation we had with Towns, but what do you think his acumen is for developing players, kind of those fundamentals? Because guys like Rose and Jimmy Butler and, all these guys in Chicago did develop under him. I mean, he has to have some, or do you think it was an assistant there that was the guy that was kind of fine-tuning things that maybe he doesn't have here?
Rose was a monster immediately.
Right.
So, that's part of it. And I think you can make the case that the Bulls coaching staff deserves a lot of credit for Jimmy Butler, but I think Jimmy Butler is also a freak human in terms of work ethic. But he came into the NBA pretty late out of college, and his development was incredible.
Marquette. Yeah, Marquette. But the thing is, like, it seems like Towns has the work ethic. There's something kind of funky about him, but he has the work ethic.
Yeah, work ethic is physical and mental,
sure,
but it's where it's directed, right?
Yeah,
because that's the thing with work ethic is I feel relatively confident that while Jimmy Butler is an insane freak of living in the gym, he was well targeted in what he was spending his time on in the gym in terms of his physical game. And I suspect that Towns has the same thing, but it's like, what is the gym for the mental side of your game?
And like when Towns would have a bad game, in the past, there have been times where he wouldn't be available for media after a game where he was really bad, and he'd be like, he's lifting, or he went immediately to go shoot or something.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying that Towns is doing this wrong. Maybe it's a coach that's suggesting it, but with these bad defensive nights, I wonder how often he goes and just studies film, Tibbs style obsession.
No, that's such a good question, because it does seem like the physical part he has down. Right.
What do we think the answer is?
Obviously, right?
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
He's not. I don't know.
We don't know though, right?
I'm sure he watches film. I'm just saying, like, I don't think that he doesn't see film as the same thing.
But to take Tim's analogy is we do know he on those games where he missed key shots at the end of the game, or he missed free throws. He has gone to the gym and like taken a Snapchat of himself or whatever at 2 a.m.
He definitely does that too.
I I straight up think he just thinks offense is way more important. And that doesn't make him unique, really, in the NBA. He just...
Or I wonder if he...
I just don't
maybe,
think...
Maybe he thinks more of his defense than...
Yeah, well,
so I think that's true. I'm going to tweak your statement a little bit. I'm going to say I think he thinks he can impact winning more with his offense than his defense.
Which you can.
But you go back to like him specifically on the defense. Like with Wiggins, it's frustrating because you're like, he has the tools, and occasionally he just locks a guy down. But we don't always see that, right?
Yeah.
With Towns, it seems like the criticism is more you have an incredibly important role in the defense, but he does not seem to take that as seriously as the role he has in the offense, where he's like. He seems to be like, I need to get my double-double, right? He's not saying I need to be the anchor of this defense. I feel like that,
which is especially frustrating for me because, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like Wiggins has spurts where he locks the guy down and it's great, but it's rarely a full game.
Yes.
I mean, it happens sometimes. Mm-hmm. For Towns, when he has a great defensive game, it's generally the entire game, and it's generally a stretch of 2 or 3, or in the case of December to January, it was like a month where he was really good defensively.
Mental, right?
Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So I guess I feel like he knows what to do, but and back to my point about film, I wonder if when he's watching film, because obviously all NBA players watch film to a certain degree, I wonder if it's harder for him to apply what he sees on film to a game. I don't know.
Yeah.
I've never had to watch film and play basketball because I was bad at basketball.
Yeah, and I think maybe having someone let's say he's not a film guy. Let's assume that
Sure.
Karl-Anthony Towns is not a big film guy.
A film nerd, right.
Operating under that assumption, I think it would be huge if he had somebody, a player or a coach on the team that was like he was really close with, and that was something they did together. And that like kind of developed a love for that.
It seems like, think of his relationship with KG and his relationship with Taj. And I realize two are very different players, right? KG, Hall of Famer, Mr. Minnesota, at least for a while.
The chattiest man in the world, yeah.
Taj Gibson, I don't think will be very much associated with the Bulls, right? You'll be like, yeah, he ended up there at the end of his career or whatever. But
I think the age gap's too big.
yeah.
I think that's what it is. And the one example, I was talking to my little brother about this, was DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. And you see Kyle Lowry came in there, and I think Kyle Lowry's 3 years older than DeMar DeRozan. And it was when DeRozan was still somewhat young in the league, and it was like a guy who'd been around a little bit more, but the age gap was like 3 or 4 years, so they were still, it was like close enough so they could be friends, And I mean, obviously, this is just me like guessing. And
Taj is like an older brother. I mean, that's kind of what he is.
Older brother, uncle. I mean, it's 10 years. It's more than older brother.
Yeah.
It's like,
and then he doesn't
gap's
have
big.
he doesn't have the acumen or the pull of a Kevin Garnett necessarily.
Yeah,
Where
right.
if like Garnett had been here for more years than he was, maybe we would have seen something different just based on his name and his reputation alone. Where Taj Gibson, historically good basketball player, but not a Hall of Famer. I wonder if that matters.
And maybe so. Like Taj is what was available, and Tibbs went and got him, and Taj has been great. But what if he would have went and got? Obviously, Taj has been better than JaMychal Green. If you look at JaMychal Green, who's younger, maybe those two, Towns and JaMychal Green, are tighter than that would have been, or like.
Or what about Jang? Like, you think Jang probably watches film, right? He seems like one of the smarter players, and kind of like, I wonder if that relationship would have developed if you don't have Taj.
Maybe.
I mean, I still take Taj, but I kind of wonder about that.
So the we talked about like a player comparison. The one that has been coming to mind through the entire discussion we've been having is the relationship between Ricky Rubio and Ryan Saunders, and how much Ryan poured his heart and soul into Ricky's development for the entire time Ricky was on this team,
And Zach too.
Like that kind of relationship that like I would bet if you talk to Ricky today, and having probably his best season yet, leading a team into a playoff race, probably getting them into a playoff position for the first time, the amount of credit that he would probably give Ryan Saunders for dedicating all of his time, all of his work to him. And it's like, you don't necessarily have to go out and get a guy to do that specifically for Karl-Anthony Towns, like go get his high school basketball coach or something.
Yeah.
But like, there's got to be some person like that to just get in his head and be like, this is what you need to do all the time, every day. We're looking
someone he
together.
respects
You know who?
as a friend.
And Garnett had, if we want to go way back, Kevin Garnett had Kevin McHale. I mean, talk about a good guy to have, especially for a guy that wasn't known as a post player when he first entered the league. He had the best post player of all time, or the best guy with the best footwork of all time, whatever you want to call it.
And we don't
know that Carl doesn't have that.
we
either.
don't know what it, because we don't get to talk to. We don't talk to the assistant coaches and really know what that role is. I can say from watching the end of practices and shoot-arounds, you see Wiggins is matched up with Brunson, and where John Lucas is with the point guards, and Crawford's also in that bunch there too. So I mean, we can kind of draw some parallels, but there might be a really tight relationship going on there.
Yeah,
that we don't know about.
Yeah,
totally.
To be fair, I guess.
Is there Tibbs seems well connected now, maybe with the league more than college, but is there a guy as part of Calipari's staff or was kind of involved there? I mean, is there a way to bring someone in almost as like a coach for Towns? Do you think that's a consideration the team makes?
The vibe I always get from Kentucky players is Calipari is.
The
It's almost
guy.
like the Wolves, where it's like Calipari is way up here, and then his assistants have roles, but it's down here. That might just be presentation too, because it's college and they need to do that.
I think it would almost be better if it wasn't like a guy that was one of Carl's guys. It was a guy that was Tibbs's guy, but then it worked that he became Towns' guy. You know what I'm saying? Like, does that kind of make like it kind of shifts itself together in that way? And again, I really think the player thing would be huge.
Yeah.
I think that, and
Which
I
you
think
can correct next year if you wanted to, right?
yeah, trade or something like that. I think that all of the same thought could be channeled to Andrew Wiggins as well, in a player who, again, somebody maybe who's like 26 years old, who's 3 years older than Andrew Wiggins, frees Andrew Wiggins like DeMar DeRozan was freed by Kyle Lowry, not just because Kyle Lowry was a great player, but because Kyle Lowry became DeMar DeRozan's best friend.
I mean, you can make the case that should be Butler, right? I mean, he's not 3 years older; he's 5 years older.
But who's Butler's connection?
What do you mean?
The young guy that Butler's taken under his wing is clearly Tyus Jones.
Sure. I'm just suggesting that by that logic,
in theory, it should have been.
Butler should be taking Andrew Wiggins under his wing for 1,000 reasons. I mean, Tyus has got potential as well, but if we're talking ceilings again, it's not even close.
Tyus is
and who's
more,
that on?
Tyus is maxing more than Wiggins. I mean, hands down. I know one has a higher ceiling than the other, but Tyus seems to be reaching his.
And maybe,
Bigger
does Jimmy
age
Butler have any? Get any credit for that? I mean, if we're going down that path, Tyus Jones is like you said, he's been playing better this year, at least exceeding expectations more than Wiggins.
So
does Jimmy Butler get credit for that, for taking him under his wing?
I think yes. For Tyus Jones improving this year? Yeah. But then does Jimmy Butler deserve blame for Andrew Wiggins regressing this season?
That seems to be more on the coaching staff. That's my impression. But let me ask this.
Well, and I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So let me ask this. Looking at, are we making the assumption here Rockets, Warriors, Blazers is 1, 2, 3 in the West, right?
Sure. Rockets, Warriors for sure.
Okay, and the Blazers seem to have separated themselves with the winning streak.
Yes.
Is it just real pauses? Where's the gap right now? Did it change
like
over this
isn't
weekend?
it like a game and a half?
It's one game between Portland and OKC, and they play each other this week.
Let's
a
include
little bit
Portland
different
there.
than when we talked a couple days ago.
So I'm going to name the coaches, and I'm just curious where Tibbs ranks in your mind among the 3 through 10, because we're still considering the Clippers there.
Oh boy.
Right? You have Stotts, you have Billy Donovan, Greg Popovich, Elvin Gentry, Tibbs, Quinn Snyder, who's the Nuggets coach?
Mike Malone,
and Doc Rivers. Where do you think?
good, Tom.
Yeah, where do you think Tibbs ranks?
I mean, if Britt Robson was here, he'd be saying Quinn Snyder's on a cloud by himself.
I know, but he's considered pretty. But Quinn Snyder is considered one of the smarter
He would be on
coaches.
a cloud, but Mike D'Antoni would be on that cloud.
I'm just
saying, of their competition 3 through 10, where do you think Tibbs ranks as a coach? Because it does seem like the margin is razor thin, and maybe.
Can I phrase that as who would you rank him above?
Yeah, let's do that.
Like
Popovich is an obvious one, right?
Because that's the thing is like I don't think we have to talk about Greg Popovich.
Gentry and Malone are my answers.
Gentry and Malone, because I think that's the easy two, and I would consider Billy Donovan as well.
Oh yeah, Billy Donovan. I'd put that there too on track record.
Because I think you go to Philadelphia, coaching seems to be a big part of their success, right? And
it's just so different than here. God, the rotations, isn't that every time I watch a Philadelphia 76ers game, I'm like, oh my God, it's been like 4 minutes and new players are in, and it's just so jarring compared to the
most
Wolves.
frustrating thing for me is that going back to the last show, I said this. The narrative was you're going to burn out your starters, right? But I understood the value of the starters. I understood this kind of like idea that you'd want to play them as much as you can. But it does seem like you're just short shrifting like the talent on your bench. Like Jamal Crawford can't play if you're only playing him 10 minutes. Bielitsa can't get in rhythm. All that stuff.
And I think it's been discussed to this point, and I think injuries and small sample size have suggested that Belly and Tyus specifically, and I think Jamal obviously too, play better with more burn when they get a chance to warm up
Jamal
on the floor.
Crawford said it explicitly, right?
Yeah.
He just came out and said
I mean, look at Belly's production as a starter versus off the bench. I think his three-point shooting is like out of this world good, but he's essentially just a catch-and-shoot three-point shooter off the bench.
Well, and it's so annoying and hilarious. Think back to the conversations we had before the season opener about this team's rotations. And how what we wanted to see was mixing and matching the starters with the bench, having at least one starter on the floor at all times. This has been a common thread for us since before we saw this team play a game together, and we still aren't seeing it a lot of the time.
Also, wasn't your article about Rose basically being like, yeah, he's good when you have starters out there, when you don't just throw him out with a whole bunch of randos.
To Tibbs' credit, he's keeping at least one starter on the floor by keeping all 5 starters on the floor most of the time. It was a joke, but anyway.
And it's also not wrong, but it's the thing is, then it's not about the starters, it's not maximizing the bench, which returns to the original point.
Exactly.
And also returns to an ongoing theme of you're doing things the exact same way you did in 2010. That is how rotations worked in 2010. Go again. We've done this before with BasketballReference.com. Go look at how the starters minutes per game and 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes per game looked like. That's it in 2010 of all teams in the NBA. That's how it worked then, and it's different now. For Tibbs, it isn't, and that's why Brett Brown's doing it differently. We see
Dwayne Casey
I
is.
mean,
they're going to play 10 guys in the playoffs, big minutes, and
even the Warriors this year.
I was going to say the Warriors isn't the Warriors. Not even just this year. The Warriors. Think about how many guys the Warriors played in the playoffs last year.
Yeah.
And how it worked, and they were able to be like, okay, this is a Pat McCaw series, this is an Ian Clark series, and you know why they were able to do that? Because those guys had the chance to play during the regular season with the starters and not with the starters, and that,
remember when they pulled David Lee out of the dead and had him play in the finals their first title? I mean, they've been doing it since the beginning.
It's just, and this comes with the caveat of this style by Tibbs of the way the rotations has worked has probably got the team 2 more regular season wins, let's say, to put it. It's got him those, but it's not the way other coaches are doing it. In the NBA
I think the flip side is going back to what I was saying about the defibrillator. Like at some certain point, you just have to become coffee. Like coffee is, you don't need to be just shocking people, you know. And this is what he was doing. Like just tossing people out for 40 minutes is a electric shock.
I think you can make the case that while playing those starters, maybe have gained you a couple extra games. I think back to the first time they played Philadelphia. The game went to overtime. And they looked like gassed. They looked completely out of gas.
And
that's happened before.
That Wizards game, I mean, they just basically kind of passed out once that
the first one, the one that they lost. Yeah,
it was like 89-90 or something. But more to the point, like this may have won them 2 more games, but also going back to this Eastern Conference thing, right now it matters that they've lost to Atlanta, Orlando. Phoenix is in the West, but Phoenix, these bad teams, like that matters right now. They're on the verge of not making the playoffs after having a relatively strong season, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about their start that I think is important to remember is Oklahoma. Pretty much everyone that's in this race right now, with the exception of Utah, who are out of this world good right now and have won, what is it, 23 of 25 still? Or have they lost since then?
Well, they lost to Atlanta, and then they lost last
night. So yeah, 23
they
of
lost last night. I missed that.
Okay, so 23 of 26. So they're on the downfall now. But the Wolves have always been no more than like 2, maybe 3 games was their peak of being ahead of Oklahoma City and Portland and Denver and all those teams. It's always been a really tight race. So I think that's important to remember. Although they did get up 10 games over 500 before a lot of teams, and then at least record-wise have coasted since then.
Well, the interesting comparison is that if you think about the other teams in the West this season that are in this playoff race, they've all gone on absurd winning runs
just gonna say.
and beaten the crap out of teams for like a significant run of time. The Timberwolves' longest winning streaks this season are 3 winning streaks of 5 games.
But
All of which were pre the middle of January.
Isn't that like so quintessentially Tibbs though? Is to have your longest winning streak be 5 and your longest losing streak to be 2. I know they just got to 3 recently, but like 60 games through the season, like that just has like the ethos of Tom Thibodeau in it. That it's like we're gonna do everything we can to be a little bit better, get a little bit more out of it, and it's not erratic. It's like the slowly increasing slope, you know. And I don't know. I was literally thinking about that when Tim said that. But yeah, 5 games. That's the longest one.
5 games is the longest one, and they did it 3 times. Once in October, once in November, once in January.
And to go back to the whole question of is Tibbs the right coach for this team? Is there a coach, and Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr don't count, Brad Stevens doesn't count. Is there a coach outside of like this, you know, the obvious guys that has them at a better point right now with the personnel they have?
I will say Quinn Snyder.
I mean,
I'll be Brit and say it.
It's so hard.
Yeah.
It's so hard. To
It's
say.
such a guessing game because we're picking off like historical results. We're picking off what we like seeing from how a team's rotations go and
guessing
ATOs
how
go.
personalities would mesh.
but what about a Brett Brown who just seems like a college coach he takes a college mentality to his younger team?
You have to remember, like, Jimmy Butler's on this team. I wonder how Jimmy Butler
Sure.
responds to another guy, because Fred Hoiberg, I think, is considered a good coach. I mean, his team is terrible and whatever, but he didn't mesh with Fred Hoiberg.
To be
I think that
clear,
matters.
I do not think Tom Thibodeau should be fired. Or
No.
that
No,
he-
not
that he is
not
the-
at all.
I don't either.
That he is the wrong coach. And I think funny thing, and I've had this up on my screen for a while because I've been meaning to say it, is I remember at the time being very frustrated that Kurt Rambis got fired because just like in principle, I'm a big believer that firing a coach is 2 steps backwards before taking a step forward.
He also was like the heir apparent in LA and stuff. He came in with some
He was
credentials.
he was the hottest
Yeah, but I'm
coaching
looking at his-
commodity at the time.
His record is
It's not good.
won 30. He was 32 and 132.
He
in
is most
Minnesota.
known for liking a certain tweet.
Well, and even Sam Mitchell, who I was loudly in favor of his removal from the position.
Me too.
His firing, the way his firing went down was a shock. Like
It was inappropriate. It was terrible.
there was
Like
half an hour after the last
You
game
have
of
a
the
big
season.
grin on your face.
I
while
know
you're
I'm
saying
not a
that.
Sam
That's
Mitchell guy,
hilarious.
but no, even me as a non-Sam Mitchell guy, I was like, that was ridiculous. how that
Right,
happened.
right.
And it's one of those things. It's like I can't, like, people can talk about it all they want. People can talk about how frustrated they are with some of the things this team has done and with how he's managed the team. They're 10 games over 500. They're probably going to be a playoff team, and they have a chance to win a playoff series if they win a few more games in their easy schedule. Like, they have the 4th best offense in the NBA.
What about this? Do you think his coaching style influences the bad losses? As in, the guys are tired, they're more likely to check out against Phoenix, against Orlando, against Atlanta, or do you pin that solely on the players?
I think it's definitely a mixture of both.
Yes.
I would put it more on the players.
Yeah, I mean that's my impression too. I'm just curious because that is a knock against the team in general, right?
I think there's more to it personally. Like, I just think that there are going to be nights where I brought up the Philly game. I think fatigue was a huge part of that. I think they were playing 8 men at that point, and I think you can maybe blame Thibodeau for not necessarily resting his starters, whatever have you. But then there are some other games where the team just doesn't bring it. Towns doesn't bring it defensively. Wiggins doesn't bring it defensively. But then there are also nights where, like, maybe a Tyus Jones comes in and does great stuff off the bench, or Belly comes in, does great stuff off the bench, but then like a Jeff Teague comes back in anyway in the 4th quarter. I think there's 2 parts to it.
I go to the New York game too. We didn't talk about it much because there's not much to talk about there. But one point I want to emphasize here is that by making that game close, you may have hurt your chances in the Philly game. Now, I know the plane breaks down. There's a lot of other factors in between, but it seems like on a road trip like this, when you know you have a back-to-back, relatively long flight to get in and out of there, you got to take care of New York so that you can kind of rest for the Philly game.
You know what's interesting is I watched the Phillies' 2 previous games to when they played the Wolves against Memphis and Orlando. Granted, really bad teams.
I just watched the
Really?
Orlando one. That was brutal.
But the thing was they got up by like 30 points on both of those teams early in the 3rd quarter. and so like specifically the Memphis game. That's why I turned it off once they took out all the starters. But they took out all the starters like midway through the third quarter. Embiid, I think, played 20 minutes in that game, and then they play Orlando in their next game. It's the same thing, and
then they play Minnesota in the next game, and they do the same thing.
Yeah, and I think in part that's due to them being fresh. A bigger part due to the teams being bad, and their opponents being bad, and then Minnesota being worse than they normally are too. But yeah, there is a point to be made of let's take care of these guys right now. So we know we have probably our biggest game of the rest of the season, Philly tomorrow. Like even forgetting about the results of that, what's your mentality going into that Knicks game? Like, I think it should be like, let's get up by let's end this first quarter up by 15. Like, we're coming out for blood to kill this Knicks team that doesn't want to be here. And that's what the mentality's got to be on Memphis on Monday, Atlanta Wednesday, Dallas Friday. It's like,
I was literally, when I was watching with my friends, I'm like, you have to remember, this Knicks team is trying to lose this game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know what I mean? The Wolves need it. Like, they need.
I don't know. I don't buy into that like at all. Like I don't buy into the idea of NBA players trying to lose.
I think that's fair, but either way, they should be an undermanned team.
No, totally.
Yeah.
100%. The Wolves should still win that game by a lot, but players on tanking teams are still trying to win.
The problem is what you will see with Memphis tomorrow night is that the tanking teams take out their best players.
Yeah.
And so the argument then is like Memphis's roster that will play in tomorrow night's game is not an NBA roster.
They're playing players who aren't average level players, out of position, and then also they're NBA caliber players or like above average players like a Marc Gasol. You won't see them playing the full gamut of the minutes. I do agree with you, and I know you're probably just Tom. You're speaking more broadly about. Yeah, it would be advantageous to lose, but
sure,
you're right. Like Memphis, if Memphis,
I think that's a fair clarification.
That narrative's just a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah.
I know you weren't saying anything like that. Well, maybe the exception of Michael Beasley on defense, but I mean,
these losing teams comprise of players that know if they win or look good in certain games, they'll get a job next year, and a lot of these players won't. Right?
And
so
NBA,
that's part of it.
Like cellar dweller NBA teams still like to play spoiler, and I think the Knicks probably knew that the Wolves are desperately trying to fight for their lives. And my assumption, if I'm a head coach of a bad team, any point this week, it's like, hey, these guys are playing for someone. Let's ruin it.
Well, and let's be real. No fan base should understand playing spoiler better than this fan base. Not a single one other than maybe Sacramento. Like, that's so one aside before we finish up. One record from 2003-2004 the Timberwolves have like one chance left to break this year is the fact this team has not won more than 5 games in a row since 2003.
Let's do it.
Sweet mercy.
They've had I think like 40 5 or more game losing streaks.
Yeah, like time. They have not a single time
since that Spurs.
The last time they did it was December of 2003. They won 6 games in a row.
I remember I was covering the game in Milwaukee, and that was for the sixth.
For the sixth one, yep.
And they're up by 20 at halftime. Started writing my story, and blew a 20-point lead.
And lest we forget, the Timberwolves lost to the Memphis Grizzlies after they'd lost 15 in a row and fired their head coach in December.
Check out the Memphis Grizzlies basketball reference page.
It
literally fills up my whole computer with L's.
Except for Denver.
Except for the Denver Nuggets, who I'm so angry at for making me look dumb. Wow. And the Spurs, who also made me look dumb and have won 6 in a row.
The Nuggets made me look dumb too, man. Don't worry about it.
So the Grizzlies have been doing more than the inverse Utah Jazz. They've lost 23 of their last 24.
So minor note, also, we should mention that Justin Patton has gotten called up to the team. Jerry Zgoda wrote a blog, like, as we've been recording this, and said that Emile Jefferson and Anthony Brown both are likely to also get called up. But as you pointed out in Twitter earlier, they have to get their contracts.
They have to sign to the vet minimum.
They have to get signed to vet minimum contracts to be playoff eligible. Which
and so
they're just cover if that happens. Like, they're not going to play.
The terminology, I guess, when I saw everybody tweeting it out was like recalled. I don't think that's what's happening. It's all the G League guys are now
Iowa season's
free to
done.
come up. Yeah,
They are now specifically because the Wolves are done.
Yeah.
The Iowa Wolves are
The
done.
Iowa Wolves lost a playoff game, I believe, on Saturday night, and are now done for the season. So it makes sense.
They were not good this year. The Iowa Wolves, just as a collective team.
I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say real quick, Mackenzie's pub on Friday. We come out and watch the game with us. It will be that Dallas game.
I was going to suggest doing a pre-recording, but it's good to have that at the end, too.
Yeah,
Mackenzie
yeah.
Pub, also go to Zone Coverage MN on Twitter and enter yourself in for a chance to win tickets for Wednesday's game against Dennis Schroeder and the mighty Atlanta Hawks.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll be at Mackenzie Pub. I think that's gonna be really fun.
And it seems like just from the Twitter activity, there'll be people out there. It should be a good time.
People will show up, and if they don't, we'll just have Patrick be a one-man
It's super
audience.
close. Also, really close to the Target Center and stuff. It's a good place to drop by if you want a drink. And
Yeah,
game.
their food, shockingly good.
Shockingly good.
David and I have
Like,
talked about that.
I was going to say,
Maybe not
like,
shockingly good. That's not the right phrasing. But like it's sort of a smaller, older-looking place. It's got a lot of character. So you think just a bar, but the food is really good.
The first few times I went there when I was not a resident of the Twin Cities, I legitimately didn't know they had a food menu. I thought it was just a bar where you drink alcohol at, but their food...
Boy,
any
did
bars
we
have
ever.
that? No, I'm serious. Like in St. Louis or Iowa, are there bars that don't serve food?
There was a bar in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where I went to college, where they did not have a food menu of any kind. It was just alcohol.
Okay, do you guys know of any bars that don't serve food here?
I gotta imagine there's
I know some
I
in
can't think of-
Mankato.
Yeah. Okay.
South Street, baby.
It might be a college town thing more than anything else. Like that.
And there's multiple breweries that don't, but
Are there?
yeah,
Not even
most
like
of them
food
have
trucks
most
or
of them have
anything?
Food trucks,
Okay, yeah, you're right. Breweries do. I can't think of a bar in Minneapolis.
Oh man, now I
The
want.
basement bar, it's right below a restaurant, but
I think they're.
What
owned
about
by
like? Do clubs count? Like dance clubs?
Because that's like I know of at least like I think
Not that I've ever been to a dance club.
Kitty Cat Club in Dinkytown. I don't think serves food, but has a partnership with the restaurant that's above them, where
Yeah,
you can
Annie's,
like
I think,
get
yeah.
food from there.
Yeah.
So it's like you're gonna have places like that who have that, but yeah, that's your bar food notes for the day.
anyways, Mackenzie's is good. It's good food, good beer. It's a really fun.
It's a wonderful
You should
place.
go there every night. You will probably see at least one person you've seen on Twitter before. Almost
Or
every night of the
if
week.
you're not
How
going to
would
come
you
every
know
night,
that from Twitter? Like Patrick's picture is of.
Yeah, Patrick
is
actually
Hope
just
with
looks
Ricky
like
Rubio.
the Hope Ricky Rubio photo. That's his face.
I legitimately assumed that for a couple of years. I had no idea what he looked like.
He loves tweeting about how he looks like Seth Rogen or something. I don't
He
know.
does look like Seth Rogen. If you've never met Patrick
He does.
Fenelon.
That's fun.
And he-
I have not.
He looks like Seth Rogen. Like it's hilarious.
Anyway,
Anyway,
if you don't have to go to Mackenzie every day. That's a lot of bar time. But come on Friday because we'll all be there.
but if you're going somewhere to drink, it's a good option.
But just wait till Friday, or don't wait.
And
Just come on
6
Friday.
o'clock. 6 o'clock is when we're going to be recording.
Yep.
So I think it'd be, I guess, kind of what I could see happening is people are going to show up more at 7 o'clock because the game tips at 7:30. But if you want to come listen to us record, we'll be going a little after 6 there. So I think, I don't know. So you're not just drinking at a bar, getting something out of it, because
Yeah.
basically what we'll just do is like kind of like a halftime.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
sort of
the
give
There's
it-
trivia,
gonna,
some trivia.
I think the thought right now is if you're interested, we're going to do halftime trivia, sort of a names in the hat, and a certain number of people will get a chance to participate. The winner will get a prize.
and potentially post game stuff too. So yeah,
Potentially post-game stuff
Yeah.
as well, assuming something interesting happens. It's Wolves versus Mavericks, so you never know.
I really think what's cool about it for me, and I'm one more new to covering the team and new to being part of like Timberwolves Twitter, and I really think it's just this kind of cool thing that exists. And there's obviously like Maggie and Patrick and some of the people and us who are tweeting more frequently about it, but there's literally thousands of people who are who follow us or follow Krasinski. And I mean, Minnesota has like a deep-rooted basketball nerd fan base. And I don't just mean like statistical nerds, but like love the Timberwolves. And I think that's sweet. And I'm sure like not all of those people are going to be here on Friday
Yeah.
at Mackenzie, but like we do have this cool community of people who have loved the game of basketball and have had that
Followed
translate.
this crappy team for a long time.
Yeah, no, man, I'm dead serious. It's
Well-
like the staying power of that. And
Also,
like,
one of the nicer Twitters. Like I follow all of them, and there's some hostile Twitters out there. This is one of the better
and
mannered
like
ones.
not recently.
Yeah,
I
not
suppose,
recently,
I
but
suppose.
Timberwolves Twitter has adopted Derrick Rose Twitter, and that has
Yeah.
not worked out very well.
Well,
Jeez.
the thing I would say about it is, like, as someone who followed this team from not Minnesota for as long as I did, people that I had met exclusively on Twitter have taken me into their homes, have bought me beer, have bought me dinner, have had me as a guest in their places of residence, have showed me cool places around town. These people are why I moved to this state.
Right.
Like, I cannot overstate that I moved to Minnesota because of the people I met on Twitter and the good people that are in Minnesota. So, like, y'all are good people. Just know that. And come out and let's drink together and make merry.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically we're going to just watch Timberwolves game like we all would be doing. Like,
and say angry things about Derrick Rose's minutes together as a family.
is he going to be healthy? You think he's going to play?
what if Jimmy Butler plays?
Dude, what if
Man, what if Jimmy Butler comes?
What if
He's not
Jimmy Butler
playing.
comes?
Dude, what if
That's
Jimmy Butler
That's the best scenario.
what
Better
if
than
Jimmy
him
Butler
playing.
and Jimmy Butler and Derrick Rose both go off?
Oh my
We're
god!
going to be so confused.
Wait,
as
like
to
score
what
a
to do.
bunch or get
Yeah.
into a scuffle?
Poor
No,
Candle
score
knows-
bonds. I think
Why
those
not
dudes are
both?
cool. I think those guys are
I
cool
know,
together.
I'm totally
No,
kidding.
but what if Timberwolves Twitter does in fact congregate at Mackenzie Pub and Derrick Rose has like 30 points? What happens?
It's interesting.
Shots.
We'll be there to break it down.
Yep, we'll be.
It's
we'll
going to be
there-
a drunk ass bar, is
Yeah.
what it's going to be.
and it's going to be a great time.
So we'll see you guys then. So for David Naylor at Prof Cedar, Tom Schreier at T Schreier3, Dane Moore at Dane Moore NBA. I'm Tim Fakeless at TIMFAKLIS. This has been another edition of Wolves Wired, and we'll see you next time.